Welcome to the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael, and today I have a special guest. It's former Boston Celtics beat writer Peter May for the Boston Globe. Peter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Raphael. Thanks for asking.
So we're going to talk about Paul Pierce, the Celtics, how it all started. Paul Pierce's career just ended. He retired after the Clippers were eliminated by the Utah Jazz in the first round. And, he had a really long career. And, looking back on it, what did you think about, how he performed throughout his career, all of the big moments, all the clutch moments, his run with the Celtics, and then some of the clutch moments he had even post-Celtics as a longtime NBA veteran? What did you think about how his career ended up?
Well, I think, Paul's probably going to go to the Hall of Fame. I think that is pretty much, universally accepted right now. I'm not sure it was, until he won a championship. But that was 10 years ago. So he really turned himself into a really good NBA player. There were a lot of question marks about him coming out of college, which is one reason he slipped in the draft. And there were questions when he got to the Celtics. He had trouble with his coaches early on, and it wasn't really until they got the trades for Garnett and Ray Allen in 2007 that everything came together for Paul. And over those next, whatever it was, 5 or 6 years, however many years he left the Celtics, he was a terrific player. Not just, the numbers really don't tell the story because he really subjugated his scoring for the better of the team at the behest of his coach. And the results showed. He finally had a team that could win something, and he never had that in his years in Boston, which was very frustrating for him. And I think it showed in his play, and it certainly showed in his demeanor.
Now, the biggest part that you mentioned, I think, is the joining together with Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett. And I guess to stay current, even though this is a historical podcast, this week Paul Pierce was on Kevin Garnett's sideshow on TNT during Inside the NBA, and they all, Ray Allen became a major subject of conversation within that. That they haven't talked with him pretty much since he decided to sign with the Miami Heat. To see all of that stuff play out the way it has, where this is like 6 or 7 years later, and they're still not on speaking terms. The rest of the roster of the core with Ray. For you, what do you think? Like seeing that they still were hurt by him leaving to go to Miami.
I think it's stupid. I think it's really just stupid. Ray Allen did what every free agent has the opportunity to do. He sifted through offers, and he took what he thought was the best one for him and his family. And why should he be penalized for that? Why should he be penalized for going to play with a team that would win the NBA championship, with him being a big part of that? No, I don't have. I think it's stupid. I really do. Ray was a consummate professional in Boston. He had some difficulties at the end. I know that. He and Rondo did not get along at the end, and when you didn't get along with Rondo back then, you never saw the ball, and there was that, and he got hurt, and then Avery Bradley started playing and played well, and Ray didn't get a starting job back right away, and he was upset about that. So there were some things that irked him at the end of his stay in Boston. But for people to forget, that was 5 years after they won the championship, or whatever it was, 4 years after they won the championship. He was a pretty big part of that team, and for them to be upset that he went to Miami, I'm sorry, that's just stupid. I think they should be embrace Ray for what he did, and he went to Miami. So okay, are we gonna burn Johnny Damon and every time we see him did he sign with the Yankees? No, you get over it, and they should get over it.
Most definitely, I definitely agree with you on that, because He had some big moments with the Celtics, from even after the championship to the first round against the Bulls the next year to, he had a lot of big playoff moments for the Celtics. So Paul Pierce, he was selected 10th overall in the 1998 NBA draft by the Celtics. The Celtics were coming off of the first year of Rick Pitino, and had really struggled to figure it out, even though they had a multitude of lottery picks, from Antoine Walker to Chauncey Billups to Ron Mercer, and they were still on that path to bringing the team back to the Larry Bird days, where the team was successful, constantly in at least the conference finals, or at least in the playoffs. So when the Celtics selected Paul Pierce, he fell all the way down to 10th. A lot of people at the beginning, expect him to be a high lottery pick, and he fell all the way down to the Celtics at number 10. Do you remember that, that day when he got drafted on draft night, and also what was the feeling around the team, around maybe like the fan base of like them drafting him? Were people really ecstatic about the Celtics drafting Paul Pierce?
Well, I think they were in the sense that they knew who he was, because he was a very high-profile college player in a very high-profile college program in Kansas, and I really think that if you look back on that draft, it was the guy that Celtics really wanted in that draft was Dirk Nowitzki, and Rick Pitino had gone over to Europe and scouted him and came away infatuated with him, as we now know why, right? That was the guy that they held, and they knew only one other team was interested in him, and that was Dallas. Of course, Dallas entered a trade, took him. But I guess right around 7 or 8, they figured they were going to get one or the other one, because Pierce was falling and Nowitzki was still on the board. But Dirk was the guy they wanted. Keon Clark from UNLV was the guy they thought they were probably going to get, because they thought both Dirk and Paul would be gone by the time they picked at 10. So Paul was a pretty good consolation prize, and I think they were very happy with him. You just had to wonder why he slipped, because no one saw him going that low in any of the mock drafts by anyone with any NBA cred at the time. They all had him going, top 5, maybe no lower than that. So getting him at 10, I think the fans were happy because they recognized who he was, and he was a big-time player at Kansas. And the Celtics were happy because, well, they didn't get Nowitzki. They got, with GM Chris Wallace, turned at the time a pretty good consolation prize.
Now, he joined the Celtics team that, Antoine Walker was their best player. They had a guy at a similar position in Mercer. How was that fit, playing, the two of them together, because they sort of were ball-dominant guys, throughout their careers. Ron Mercer was a guy who wasn't a great shooter, and so a lot of it was him having the ball and being a scorer. How did that fit? Was that fit sort of awkward of them playing together in Pierce's rookie year?
Well, you have to remember the rookie year it was a lockout, so they didn't start the season until I don't know when, January or something. So he came in behind, right away, because he had maybe 2 weeks of training camp or something, and a couple exhibition games. So, and he wasn't in shape, and a lot of the players weren't in shape. And Pitino was, a fitness freak, and in the year before his first training camp, everybody was on IVs during practice because they were so dehydrated from all the work that they did. I mean, he was determined to have them. If they weren't going to be the best team, they were going to be the fittest team in the NBA and in the best shape in the NBA. So that was one of his real, that was one of Rick's big things, is he wanted everybody to be in shape. And, Paul wasn't in shape, and then he got hurt in his rookie year and missed some games with an ankle injury, and Rick kind of threw him under the bus. So, I mean, it was a very tough year for him in that regard, because it just, it wasn't a conventional NBA year by any stretch of the imagination. And, Mercer and Antoine were there. Rick was desperate. He wanted a point guard. He drafted Chauncey Billups, and then he really figured out that Chauncey was, even though Chauncey guard. He didn't play the kind of point guard that Rick wanted. So he was constantly tinkering with the lineup, with the team. He traded Chauncey midway through his I think it was his rookie year, and then they had Kenny Anderson, and so I mean that was before Paul got there. But it just Rick was always tinkering with the team and trying to find a center and trying to find a point guard. But Paul kind of fit nicely into that small forward spot, and that was where he would eventually play most of his games.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned a good point about like Pitino being a tinkerer. I remember he signed Chris Mills. This is obviously before Pierce, but he signed Chris Mills in 1997, and then after training camp, he traded him to the Knicks like 2 months after he had signed him. For I think Walter McCarty and a bunch of other players, Dante Jones. So like, what was Rick Pitino like? As an aside, sort of just that he was very quick in making moves and getting rid of players and sort of just trying to find a fit for the team.
Yeah, I mean he was just a very, very impatient person who had been used to getting his way at Kentucky, and frankly never should have left Kentucky. I think we can all agree on that now. It wasn't, if it wasn't working, he wanted, and the problem was that he was also the general manager. He didn't have a buffer. He had Chris Wallace was there, but Chris Wallace was there to make phone calls and scout players and stuff and do the administrative stuff, but Rick had the power to make the personnel moves. So Pitino, the GM, was Pitino, the coach's worst enemy, because he couldn't contain himself. I mean, you mentioned Chris Mills. That summer they left. ML Carr left him with 2 lottery picks and a bundle of cash to spend in free agency, and he renounced Rick Fox and signed Travis Knight. And he just did continually mind-boggling things. Chris Mills is another example. Chris Mills' situation, that was in '97, but I mean Rick didn't change. He was continually training people and trying to get people, and he traded away a number 1 pick in the draft for the tally position that he had as a scorer and a pretty good player. Rick doesn't care about that. He wants to make sure that he can do his wind sprints and is in the right place on the full court press and stuff like that. That was Rick didn't last long, and there were a number of reasons why.
With Paul Pierce in his rookie year, right away from like your vantage point, did you see the all-star, superstar type of player that he would become in his career down the road? Were there ever glimpses like in his rookie year playing during that season? I know, like you said, he was dealing with an injury. He was trying to get in shape with the lockout situation. Were there ever any moments that you remember from his rookie year where you're like, wow, I think that this guy could really become a superstar, or a guy you could build a team around?
I don't remember anything particular that year, other than that, that I thought he was going to be a very, established NBA player, maybe if not for the Celtics and for somebody else. I mean, I definitely think he was, he was worth the pick, and I thought he was good. I mean, if memory serves, it was him and Vince Carter who were like kind of neck and neck for Rookie of the Year that year. And I think Vince ended up winning it pretty much because Toronto had the better team than Boston did, and we all sort of thought that, if the rookie helps his team, make the playoffs or make a big improvement, that should count for something. And the Celtics just kind of went sideways that season with Pierce. So I think that's probably why he didn't get more consideration. But yeah, I don't remember any particular game. I'm sure if I really racked my brain, went back and read, I could come up with some. But it's a long time ago. It was like 20 years ago. And I know that's bizarre to me. And but you could tell that he wasn't going to be a bust. He wasn't going to be Robert Traylor, who went 4 picks ahead of him, for instance. And he was going to be a legitimate NBA player. Did you think he was going to be a superstar? That was hard to see at that point. They were such a bad team that you couldn't really. It's always dangerous to make judgments on players on bad teams who put up big numbers or 2 things like that because it doesn't mean anything in the grand scope of things if they don't win. And that's something that all NBA players grapple with until they finally understand that it's really more about winning than it is about me, and especially the better ones. And I think Paul probably had to deal with that too. I mean, he went from a very, very good program in Kansas. I think he lost 11 games in 3 years there. And then, boom, they probably lost 11 games in the first month he was in Boston. So it's a major adjustment for any rookie.
And, the Celtics went 19-31 that year, his rookie year in the lockout season. They went 35-47 in 1999-2000. And then they made a modest improvement of 36-46 in 2000-2001. Now, 2000-2001 is the year that Rick Pitino he resigned. He stepped down from the team. What was Paul Pierce's relationship like with Rick Pitino in that time? And a lot of things had happened from during that time. Like, obviously, I've forgotten to mention also, like, Ron Mercer got traded after the 98-99 season, and a lot of things had happened, but the team never had the success that under Pitino that a lot of people expected with his standing in basketball as a great college coach. He had coached the Knicks to some a degree of success. What was the feeling like when Rick Pitino departed from Boston?
Well, I mean, I can tell you what Paul's was because he told me that one day when I was talking to him for a book I did on the 08 championship team, and by that time, I mean, he'd been with Rick for almost 4 years now, and they'd come to grudgingly accept one another. I mean, early on, Pierce had a good game, and Pitino brought him into his office and said, we're going to have to start bringing you off the bench because we don't want you to get too big a head out there. No. And Pierce said, come on, and he said, Rick could really mess with you was the way he phrased it. And Rick could mess with you, but by the time, if you watch Rick Pitino, I mean, it was like watching King Lear, that season. It was just a deterioration of a man about to go mad. I'm not understating that. I think he would have had a serious breakdown if he had stayed in Boston. It was that bad for him. And he knew by the time they got to Miami, or what would be his last game, that it was going to be his last game. He had a house down there, and he wasn't going to come back with the team. He told Jim O'Brien this before the game, and he also told Paul Pierce that this was going to be his last game. And Pierce, to this day, thinks that he's the only one on the team that Rick mentioned that to, the only player on the team. And when Pierce came out of the game, they got rolled by the Heat that night, which was surprising nobody. They gave each other a hug on the sideline. And I was watching it at home at that night. I wasn't covering the game for the Globe at that time. And I was watching it at home, and I just said to myself, "Oh my God, I think Rick's going to quit." He made all these he made all these promises. If they don't make the playoffs this year, I'll leave. I'll know when it's time to go. And it was abundantly clear to pretty much everybody at that point in time that he had to go, not just for the Celtics, but for his own sanity. And when they hugged on the sideline, I just said to myself, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." And then, our writer at the end of the game, found out that Rick was indeed leaving, and I got a call from the Globe at like 11 o'clock. Can you write something? We need it by 12:15. And I remember I wrote, Rick Pitino's leaving the Celtics in worse shape than he found them, because they were a mess then, and it was just he just was a disaster in Boston, and he's admitted that he's a great college coach, and that's that should be enough, and it did. It got him into the Hall of Fame, and he belongs in the Hall of Fame as a college coach.
Now thinking about it, I also forgot about the Pitino speech that he had at one of his press conferences where he said that Robert Parrish is not walking through that door.
Right.
Larry Bird.
Yeah.
So was that at that time? that situation, like, was that a sign that he was really like frustrated with the situation, and was that like a good indicator too? Because I definitely, that's like, it goes down in like forever. Everyone always brings that up, sort of, not alongside like Allen Iverson, but it's definitely one of the NBA press conference like memories that people remember.
Yeah, it's in the it's in the top 10 or whatever. Yeah, for sure. It was just another sign that he just didn't get it. He was. I mean, the Celtics were losing, lost at home, got booed, and he just he just started tripping basically, and he said, our guys play hard, they work their asses off, they do da. And these fans should know that. If they saw this team at practice, they'd appreciate it more. They see how hard these good guys work. And then he just, Larry. They think Larry Bird's coming through that door. They're mistaken. They think Robert Parrish, and Kevin McHale. And I remember calling them up after. I remember calling Larry and Kevin up after that. And just when they'd obviously heard about it by then. Kevin was roaring about it. He said, I'd have to color my hair like Rick does to come back, something like that. It's just some really snide comment. But yeah, I mean, it just showed that he really, so much of what he wanted. I mean, I think there was always this indication in him that the expectation that he would coach the Celtics at some time, just because he'd been at BU and he'd been at Providence, and that he'd gone to UMass, and there was always a New England thing with him. And I think as he developed into a coach and he showed he could coach in the NBA with the Knicks, I think there was always kind of this expectation that if he ever came out of college again, it would be to coach the Celtics. And he did, and he got a humongous contract. And he later said, I violated one of the first rules that I always try to live by, and that is never take a job just for the money. Now, you can say that if you're rich, like Rick was. If you're not, sometimes you have to take the job for the money. But he took the job for the money, and because, it was almost preordained in Boston and among Celtic fans. We just kind of always thought that at some point, he might become the coach of the Celtics. And then when it, turned into the Hindenburg for him, it just, it was, just a sight. So, yeah, that was the post-game rant. That was one of the things that just kind of led to his undoing. Because, the people read that in the paper the next day. And what is this guy talking about? Come on, we just watched him. They lost, at home and didn't play well. And, he's been ridiculous.
So Pierce went through his own situation. In late 2000, he was stabbed multiple times at a nightclub in Boston, and he recovered and ended up playing all 82 games. Now, do you remember that night when news first hit, when news first broke? What was that like to cover? Because that's definitely a very scary, very very scary situation.
I mean, it was, and it hadn't been that long since we'd just been through Reggie Lewis, dying, and all the controversy around that. And then you get a guy like Pierce, who's, he goes to a nightclub and he gets stabbed, and he almost died that night. It was much more serious than we, I think, were told or had been led to believe. That to me, if I had to list, the most impressive feats of Paul Pierce's career, that would be the top, right? From the time that I was associated with him, which is from when he was drafted till when he left the team, is the fact that he missed a lot of training camp that year, and he came out and I believe he started to. I may not have started the first game, but he played in all 82 games. And that to me was amazing. Because you think about the fact that how many NBA players play 82 games when they don't get stabbed during training camp. And, some do, but most don't. So I thought that was, and he was doing it on a bad team. Again, he had every reason to take his time and, get better. And not sweat it out. But he came back and he played all 82 games for a bad team. And to me, that's right up there at the top of my personal, Paul Pierce favorite, moments in Boston. I mean, I know what he did in '08. That was great, but I just think this showed his remarkable resilience.
Now, going further, I know that in the nightclub, he even had to deal with the trial after because of the assailants that were tried under court, and he had to testify and everything. How did he deal with that? Knowing the people that had assaulted him in the nightclub. So like going through a couple of seasons until like the trial actually took place. But like how did he go through playing his career while knowing that had happened and these guys had done that to him?
Well, I mean, I think athletes have a way of compartmentalizing things to an extraordinary degree, and sometimes they have no choice. Sometimes they have to. Like Isaiah Thomas of the Celtics now, he's been dealing with the death of his sister, and that's I'm not going to call it a distraction because that wouldn't be right, but that's what I mean. I mean, he's distracted because of that, and he has said that he gets his solace on the court, and that's where he can forget about everything but basketball. And I think that's what Paul did, and I think that's what Kobe did while he was trying to stand trial for rape and taking flights on game days to Denver for court appearances, stuff. He said you're able to compartmentalize the things that go on in your life that aren't around that don't revolve around basketball or center on basketball, and I think that's what he was able to do. And I think you have to. I mean, if you think about it, you probably do that in your own job, but you're not doing it in a public way like Paul was or Isaiah is doing it now. And so I think that's how he did it. I mean, I don't know how else you could do it. You can't be picking up the papers every day. And us as sports writers, we didn't deal with the trial. That and the legal part of it, that was the Globe Metro team did that. So we didn't have to worry about that. But Paul, sure, it's always facing you. The lawyer's calling you. Yeah, you got to give a deposition, and the lawyer's calling you saying, they want to see your medical records or whatever. So, but I think athletes do have a way of dealing with that, and it's through on the court, and that's where that's their sanctuary.
And moving back to basketball, the Celtics put Jim O'Brien in place of Rick Pitino. He was the assistant coach on the Celtics. And in 2001, 2002, the Celtics make the playoffs for the first time since I think it was 95. So it's a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So Pierce and Walker really formed this like a massive duo. They sort of I think if you look at like usage rates and sort of just how much teams relied on like two superstars, like they pretty much were responsible for a lot of the heavy lifting of that 2001-2002 team, which I think is really one of the interesting teams just because they shot so many threes at a time when threes were not in vogue like they are now, and to see them succeed the way that they did that year was always like really fun because Pierce had a career year, made his first All-Star team. Do you remember that season when their success finally started to come to that duo?
I do. I mean, it was. I think most of us were taken by surprise. I don't think any of us. I think they ended up winning 52 games that year and getting like the second or third seed in the East. I don't think anybody saw that coming. The one thing that you could have noticed if it was the way O'Brien had finished and the Celtics had finished the previous year when he took over for Rick, and I believe they still had pretty much all or most very different kind of person than Rick is, and he's just very quiet, and he's demanding, but he's not demanding in a histrionic sense like Rick can be, and the players. The players all love the assistants who are beat up by the head coach. I mean, the Celtics went through the same thing with Casey Johnson, Bill Fitz in the '80s, and they were so happy to have Casey that they ended up winning the championship in his first year. And this is the same thing with Jim. They just were happy to be rid of Rick, and Jim knew his basketball, so it wasn't like they were getting a drinking buddy, and you could see that everything had just lifted, but I don't think anybody anticipated that 0-1, 0-2, and the run all the way to taking a 2-1 lead in the conference finals before the Nets closing out. So, but that was the start. I mean, Jim got him going, and then and then Danny came in the next year, and then Danny started to tinker, the way Rick started to tinker, and pretty soon they were back, pulling weeds again.
So like that year, the Celtics made a really big trade at the trade deadline. They dealt Joe Johnson, who was a rookie at the time, along with a few other players, to the Phoenix Suns for Rodney Rogers and Tony Delk, who ended up playing like big roles in the playoffs for the Celtics. What do you think that move did for the team, especially how it really set them up for that playoff run that they had in 2002?
So that's what it did. I mean, Rodney Rogers was a free agent, or was going to be a free agent, but he played a huge role on that team because O'Brien would use him as a center, and O'Brien later did the same things with Walter McCarty too. He played these like 3-point shooting big men as centers who could defend other centers who might not be particularly offensively gifted, like a Dikembe Mutombo or a Theo Ratliff or somebody like that, or a Todd McCullough for the Nets. Those guys were kind of just, they were centers, but they weren't scoring centers particularly. So you could put a Rodney Rogers on a guy like that. And meanwhile, at the other end, Rodney would be popping out wide open threes all the time, and same with McCarty. So, that was a big trade. But the interesting thing about that trade, which we didn't know about at the time, but which I was able to unearth a few years later, was that Phoenix was desperate to get off of Tony Delk's contract. I think Tony Delk made like $2.1 million or something. I mean, this is an absurd amount if you think about it now. But they were desperate to get off this contract, and the Celtics would have taken either Celtic rookie Joe Johnson or Kedrick Brown. They didn't care. They just wanted, and Joe and Kedrick were, I don't know, they weren't too far apart in salary. So the Celtics could have given, the Suns would have easily taken Kedrick Brown on that trade instead of Joe Johnson. And we know what happened to Kedrick Brown, and we also know what happened to Joe Johnson. So looking back on it now, you think, oh my God, if the Celtics had just kept Joe Johnson in that deal and sent them Kedrick Brown, who knows what would have happened. But, Joe had started very well that year, and then the Celtics, Jim O'Brien had soured on him. Jim wasn't a big guy on rookies, but they were all enthralled with Kedrick Brown's athleticism. The guy could jump through the roof. He couldn't do a whole lot else, but he could jump through the roof. And so they kept him instead, and he was gone, I don't know, a year and a half later. And so Johnson went on to, as we know, bigger and better things.
Most definitely. So, I think that season everyone looks back on the comeback against the Nets. Like you had mentioned previously, they took a 2-1 lead after they came back from 26 down. They were down by 21 points going into the fourth quarter of Game 3. And Pierce scored 18 of his 28 points in the fourth quarter. And the Celtics made a massive comeback. And, that had to have been, like, one of the best games ever to watch. It's one of the comebacks I remember, as a kid watching basketball. And so, like, do you remember like covering that game and like when it happened? Like, how crazy was that comeback against New Jersey?
Well, I have to disappoint you here because I was not at that game.
Oh, really?
I was covering the Western Conference Finals at the time
Oh.
between the Lakers and the Kings.
Oh, that's a pretty good. That's a pretty good series to watch, though.
Yeah, the infamous Game 6, right?
Yeah.
The Globe was thinking that, oh my God, we could have a Celtic Lakers final again. So I'll go out and cover it and, start getting like features ready on Phil Jackson and, Rick Fox and, whoever. So I was watching that at a bar in Santa Monica, I think, or somewhere. I was out to lunch with a friend of mine from the Chicago Tribune, and we were watching the game. And the one thing we both like laughed at the end, I don't know if you remember this, but they win the game, and both Pierce and Walker, like, they get up on the tables, the scoring tables, and leading the crowd in cheers and singing. And I'm thinking, guys, you're up 2-1. I mean, it was a great comeback and everything, but they're celebrating like they won the championship. And so the very next game they play, they get down huge again. They come back again, but they don't quite finish it off. And then the last two games are kind of like inconsequential. The Nets kind of assert their superiority. They were the better team, and that was that. But yeah, I mean, I was watching it probably like you were. I mean, it was a fun game to watch. You could see the Garden. I mean, I'll never forget they panned Rod Thorne, who was the general manager of the Nets at the end of the game, and he looked like his dog had just died. So it was quite something. But I was not there in person to see it.
That makes me think of an interesting point. You said that there was this anticipation of the possibility, and I remember that the anticipation of a possible Celtics Lakers finals, rematch a decade later or decades later. Was that anticipation really a big thing? Like, were people, once they got to the conference finals, you're obviously only one round away from making it to the NBA finals. What does that stick out to you, like that focus on, wow, the Celtics might actually end up playing the Lakers and, for a championship again?
I mean, it did. I mean, we were also, as I said, I think we were all surprised they won as many games as they did. Then they beat a pretty good Detroit team in the second round, and oh my God, okay, now they're in the conference final. Now they're up 2-1. By that time, I was already in California, following the Kings and the Lakers, and that was the expectation. I mean, I don't know what would have happened if the Celtics and Kings had won those series, because I didn't have anything on the Kings. And they were a good team. I mean, they were a really good team, and you could argue they might have been a better team than the Lakers that year. They just, didn't get the breaks. But so I don't know what would have happened if the Celtics and Kings had won, because I would have come back with an empty notebook. I had a lot of stuff on Phil Jackson and Rick Fox and all these guys, and I didn't have anything on Chris Webber or Vlade Divac. So it would have been interesting, but. It was. I mean, that's one of the, that's the sport's, marquee matchup. I think you'd have to argue the two most successful teams in the history of the league, and it had so many, like, epic championship series in the 80s and the 60s, and now here we are, 15 years or whatever it is later than the last time they met, and, all new group of characters, and, oh my gosh, it could happen again.
Did you ever get to use anything from that? Obviously the Lakers ended up going to the finals and playing the Nets. Did you ever get to use any of that, stuff that you got on Rick Fox?
Yeah, I'm sure I did right during the finals that year. I'm sure I, wrote some Lakers stuff during the finals that I got when I was out there. But so much of my assignment and my questioning was predicated on Boston winning and playing the Lakers that, a lot of it I couldn't use. And by the time they met in 2008, it wasn't everybody had either retired or it wasn't valid. The teams are completely different.
Yeah. Okay. So getting back to Pierce, so we covered that part, like the early stages of his career with the Celtics. You mentioned Danny Ainge, and he comes in, And after they lose to the Nets, they got swept, I think, in 2003 in the semifinals by the Nets. He trades Antoine Walker, which is sort of like the end of that whole experiment of Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker together. And it sort of changes the direction of the franchise, essentially, because, the team is never the same. I think they, 03, 04, they made the playoffs, but they got swept in the first round. And, 04, 05, they brought Antoine Walker back, but he was a free agent, so they let him walk in free agency, or they traded him to the Heat in a big trade. And the team never really got built back up with Pierce until they got KG and Ray Allen. What was it like for Paul Pierce to, when you lose a star like Antoine Walker, who had, I think, been a 3-time All-Star or something with the Celtics, it must be hard when you know that the team is not going to be built to really contend or compete for, anything, really, because at best they were a first-round exit type of team. How did he adjust to when Antoine Walker got traded and sort of just the moving pieces within the franchise and sort of the team sort of falling away from where they were a couple years prior?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't happy about it. They developed a pretty good, chemistry relationship, however you want to phrase it. On the floor, their games are very different, so they didn't overlap all that often. And but I think in his mind also, when the trade was made, it was also a statement that this was the guy. He was the guy now. There was nobody else but him. And he was, and if they were going to win, they were going to, try to build around him. Danny would say that constantly. We've got to get Paul some help. Paul needs help. I want to get Paul help. And and it came to a point where Danny did what that was enough for Tim O'Brien. He quit again in the middle of the season, like 3 years after Rick had quit in the middle of the season, they finished out the year, like you said, they made the playoffs, and they got swept by Indiana. And then the next year, Doc came in, and they didn't get along with at all at first. And they made the playoffs that year, and then they got, that's when they brought Antoine back, I think it was, and they had Gary Payton, Richie Davis. That's a tough group. That's a tough group. They made the playoffs, but they lost in the first round to Indiana. They got upset. And, Paul was still being, he didn't really grow up until that summer, after that first year, because, Doc brought him in that first year and said, "Do you think you're a good shooter, Paul?" Paul said, "Yeah, I'm a good shooter." And Doc said, "You shoot 40% from the field. You may think you're a good shooter, but you're not. And, I'm going to tell you that we're going to make your job easier for you. You're going to be more efficient. And you're going to shoot a much better percentage." And, that's, Pierce here Saturday, he's going, "What are you talking about?" In his mind, he was always in his mind, a better player than perhaps people thought he was outside the franchise. So, it took a while, for him and Doc to see eye to eye, but he finally figured out that, what Doc wanted to do was what was best for the team and would be, in the long run, best for Paul. And they had to endure, 2, 3 tough seasons before, then they made the trade for Kevin and Ray.
And so, his run in Boston, obviously they won the championship and, competed for titles in future years down the road. Obviously lost the finals against the Lakers in 2010. So, looking back on his career, I know we talked about it at the beginning, but looking back on his career, where do you think he ranks, in Boston basketball history, like with the Celtics? Will he go down as one of the best Celtics of all time?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any question about that. I think, he's going to be, I think people will look back at him and say top 5 Celtics of all time, maybe. You could take the entire Bill Russell team and say, no, nobody's getting back that. And then you went, well, wait a minute, what about Bird McHale? how about then Dennis Johnson? I mean, there were so many great ones, but I think he's generally regarded. I mean, so much of it was longevity with him, and the ability to play through pain and the ability to stay healthy without getting stabbed was good, and so that counts for something too. So I think he's got to be, I don't know, top 5, top 6, 7, somewhere in there. I mean, you have to remember there's a lot of Hall of Famers up in those rafters. His numbers were up in those rafters, and they were all pretty good players too. So, and most of them won multiple championships. So, Paul got his.
And final question. So, you covered Paul Pierce for a really long time, like you said, from his rookie year to when he left Boston. What is one thing that people might not know about Paul Pierce that you remember covering him that you thought was the most interesting?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I mean, I have stories about Paul, and I just think he developed. I mean, you could watch him. He matured before your eyes, I think, is the way I like practicing before practice, taking shots. Michael Olavaconde, Swiss, Mike Bibby, Swiss, all the guys that were drafted ahead of him. He had a chip on his shoulder from that draft, and he even had a chip on his shoulder a little bit in college as well, I was told. So I think to watch the maturation of an individual and see him morph, he was going to be a big-time scorer to the type of player he ended up being, which was a good scorer, but not necessarily, I think was, in my mind, that's what Paul Pierce is all about as a Celtic. He came in thinking he was one kind of guy, and he left knowing he was not that guy, but and somebody different, but also somebody, I think, better.
Yeah, that's really the sign of greatness within Paul Pierce. The constant willingness to improve. Peter, thank you so much for coming on the NBA Trades podcast to talk about Paul Pierce's career. Good luck to him in future endeavors. Hopefully he's on Kevin Garnett's show a lot more to talk about the NBA. But yeah, Peter, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And this is the NBA Trades podcast.
Okay, well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
All right, thank you, Peter, for coming on the NBA Trades podcast. You can always subscribe to the podcast at NBA Trades Podcast on iTunes. Just search for it. We're on Stitcher. We're on Google Play too. You can follow us on Twitter at NBA_trades. Like the page on Facebook, NBA Trades. And leave a review. Rate, review, write a comment. It would really help for the podcast. And peace.